My name is Anita Daher. I love books. I love to read them. I love to write them. I've traveled all over where I've found incredible stories, but the ones that are closest to my heart are the ones from right here. This is Made in Manitoba, Stories from Home, a show about Manitoba books and the authors who write them. Welcome to Made in Manitoba, Stories from Home. Our guest today is my friend, Winnipeg author and former teacher librarian, Harriet Zaidman, author of City on Strike. Harriet will talk about her novel and the research that went into it, and a little later on she'll show us some of the dishes from her cooking blog, North and Nosh. Welcome, Harriet Zaidman.
Well, thank you for having me, Anita. It's very nice to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to see you again. Always glad to see you. City on Strike is your fourth book, but your first novel. You actually have 3 picture books.
Right.
Out. Is that, and you brought them?
I did.
Before we get into talking about City on Strike, how about you show us these beautiful, colorful picture books?
Okay, well, this is my first book, which I published with a former student, actually. She did the art.
Okay.
It was sort of a coincidental meeting with Sarah Neville, and she actually told me that she'd grown up and become an artist. I remembered that she had been so interested in art as a student, and I said, well, what kind of art do you do? She says, well, my specialty is painting dogs.
I love it.
So we had a good collaboration, and this is just based on my dog trying to get on the couch all the time and my futile efforts to keep her off. She learns lessons from looking at the books, solves all the family's problems. Yep. And she
As dogs do.
As dogs do, and she finally gets a library card out of it.
Wonderful.
To choose her own books.
And very quickly, your other 2 books, let us see those beautiful books.
Okay, Sherman and the Sheep Shape Contest.
I love it.
I love sheep. It's about a sheep who they can't get into the shape. Their shepherds run contests to get their sheep into shape with dogs barking them into the positions. And this is about that.
And your third book?
This is about Benny's Dream Horse. Actually, this came from a story my father told us about growing up in the north end of Winnipeg, about the next door neighbor who had a horse, promising kids horses. I changed it so that this kid wants to be a cowboy, can't see that dream realized. He steals the horse, and then what happens when he steals the horse? It actually turns out to be a better result than what he intended.
And speaking of North End Winnipeg, that brings us to our subject for today, your book, City on Strike. Why don't you tell us what it's about?
Well, City on Strike is set during the Winnipeg General Strike of 1919, which was the largest labor event in Canada. 35,000 people at least walked out of their jobs in 1919 for 6 weeks for higher wages and better working conditions. People all over North America were on strike frequently in those days because of the great poverty that was everywhere. And all the events coalesced so that in Winnipeg, something that was supposed to last a very short period of time ended up being 6 weeks long, mostly because the employers and the government refused to negotiate and kept people out, tried to starve them out, and then finally attacked the strike with the Northwest Mounted Police.
Hugely significant history for Winnipeg, but this isn't a work of nonfiction, it's historical fiction. So what is the story about? Who's it about?
The story is about 2 children, and the way events affect them. These are children of an immigrant family, very poor immigrant family, and it's representative of many, many families at the time. Live in a house with no running water, didn't have sewage in those days. Disease was very common. Winnipeg had a very high child death rate because of the situation with services, and these children are wondering, their father and their mother both support the strike, and what is going to happen to them? And they both try to support the strike, and yet they find themselves challenged as to whether they can support the strike, and it's how they get through it.
Such a loving family, such a close family, and you tell the story in alternating chapters with the brother and the sister, and the brother is a mail carrier, or not a mail carrier,
a newspaper boy. And I made him a newspaper boy because he would get around the city. I based it on my dad, who was a newspaper boy. My father wasn't born then, he was born in 1922, but it's the same thing. Like, he knew a lot more about the city because he had to go sell papers downtown or wherever. And so I gave the boy that flexibility. He learns a lot, meets different kinds of people that he would not normally have. And his sister is 11, and she's still a little innocent. She's she's wanting to be an adult.
She's window shopping with her friends.
Yeah. And so when she is exposed to the events of the strike, it's more jarring to her. But it's it's her way of experiencing the strike. I wanted to give two different kinds of outlooks
and different experiences. And the boy, he's a little bit older and much more aware of the need for money. Mm-hmm. And so he is really conflicted. And I think you do this just beautifully when he breaks the strike because he wants to sell newspapers south of the river. And he's selling not the Winnipeg Free Press, the Manitoba
Free Press.
Manitoba Free Press.
I based that on a real memoir on someone who broke the strike.
And he's actually physically ill. Yeah. He brings this money, he lies to his parents as to where the money came from so that they can buy food for the table, but he's so physically ill by what he's done that he can't eat it. Mm-hmm.
When the provincial government mandated school, because they didn't have compulsory education, to certain ages, when they mandated it, children of, say 10, 12, 13 and all that, they all went to school, work part-time. So that's why children worked part-time, was they had to support their families. They could no longer work full-time. So, but all the kids had part-time jobs trying to help out. So it was completely normal for Jack to be doing that.
At some point in the story, there's sort of the idea of things don't change, right?
Right.
And I was struck by how similar certain things are to today in terms of newspaper headlines. Today we have fake news, and there was so much propaganda with the different headlines. There's
all the newspapers in town, there were 6 newspapers in Winnipeg, and then the newspapers around the country were absolutely opposed to the strike and created an incredible hysteria about Bolsheviks honing in on Winnipeg and trying to foment revolution. They had sent 6 people here or 4 people here, like they just made up numbers and made things. And they never wanted to address the issue of the disastrous working conditions that people were subjected to, or the terrible wages. Prices had risen 80% during the war, but wages had been held down. Mm. It cost about $1,800 for a family of 5, say, to survive, but the average wage was about $900 a year. So people were starving. Yeah. Like literally.
And depending on which newspaper they subscribed to, that's the truth that they believed in. Whatever their own ideals were, those were the headlines that they read. And so just like today, the headlines that you read sort of solidify your own beliefs.
Well, they certainly did want to do that. And one of the quotes and the things that the newspaper said, it's just appalling. This is a quote from the Winnipeg Telegram. It talked about the immigrants. It said, "Their ignorance is impenetrable. Their customs are repulsive. Their civilization is primitive. Their characters and morals are justly condemned. They are surely not the class of people paid immigration agents should seek. They are the scum of Europe." So it was okay for these people, my relatives and everyone else's relatives, to come here and work for absolute slave wages, to suffer in order for these people to profit. But they should not demand to be treated with dignity or to be rewarded accordingly. You know.
We will continue this conversation. You're tuned into Made in Manitoba Stories from Home with today's guest, Harriet Zaidman, author of City on Strike. I'm your host, Anita Daher. We'll be right back. Just joining us, we're speaking today with Winnipeg-based author Harriet Zaidman. Welcome back.
Nice to be here.
Last segment, we were talking a little bit about how things don't change, certain things. And during the break, we were talking about the pandemic, the coronavirus, and how it's affecting people. In your novel, of course, you do talk about the Spanish flu. Mm-hmm. And when I read your novel, I was struck just by some of those similarities. But one of the things I'm curious about, back then, neighbors really helped neighbors. If there was somebody with the Spanish flu, and really it was so common, everybody had it, much as is happening in other parts of the world, although very severe in most cases with the Spanish flu for anybody who got it, including with one of our main characters, the father. He ended up, which is how he lost his job, and they were really struggling. But I'm interested in your thoughts as to, our society now. Are we more distant from our neighbors? I wonder if we'd have that same helping out.
Well, that's very true. I think that what they did in 1918, because there was such a barrier, such a division in society ethnically, many of the ethnic groups both didn't trust and didn't know how to approach the government, for instance, the city government, and they weren't treated well. So the ethnic groups just went and organized among themselves. Everybody who spoke the same language or came from the same area, they mobilized. And many people knew each other, were related, or had threads. There were these threads through the community. So they did. So the city did have, a structure that they set up, but it wasn't a friendly structure that people felt that they could approach, and people were quite afraid of it. One thing they were also afraid of was, maybe being deported, because there was just this great animosity towards immigrants, and they would find some way, so there was this distrust of the immigrants to go. Plus, they had to pay to go to the hospital. So people did take care of each other, whether it was with food or clothing or some kind of nursing. They did. That
helping each other out of neighbors and just the toughness, the strength of family, the closeness of family. I mean, every Winnipegger knows that's North End Winnipeg. That is our generations of people who came here. And this is your family story as well. So who are these people in the photo?
Well, this is a great photo that we only discovered a few years ago. So this is my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother. This is my grandmother, Goldie, who is in the story. Her sister Jenny, and this is my dad at age 7. This is a photo from 1929, and there were 2 more siblings. There's 4. There were 2 more siblings to come.
So your parents were born right shortly after this
very
they were
born in
significant time period, but their parents experienced this.
They did.
Did you have family stories? Did family stories come down about that
Only
time?
a few. Like one of my grandmothers, the other grandmother was a garment worker, and she walked out. That's all I know. And my grandfather, married to Goldie, was a young man, like age 22 maybe or something like that. I'm not quite sure. He tried to pull a Mountie off his horse because people were being beaten. The Mounties had these big batons, and they were beating people. And I do know that he did try to yank someone off. I don't know if he was successful, but he hid in their root cellar when he got home, because they were going around arresting, and they did deport a sizable number of people.
The father had to hide in a root cellar, and the family, no cell phones, can't text home. Family had no idea where he was. And so that came from a true story.
It did,
Yeah, so many truths in your story, and that's the joy of being a writer, that you can weave in some truths and also make things up. You have significant historical figures in here, but others you had to make up. I was really interested in the story of the son of
A.J. Andrews.
A.J. Andrews.
I did make him up because I needed someone. I needed Jack to meet someone on the other side. I could have maybe created a relationship with a girl. I considered that, but I wanted that boy. Boys had more independence, and I wanted them to meet later, and so I created that situation.
And towards the end of the story, I mean, you really show his growth as well. I mean, he's not a major player, but you show that he can be an independent thinker, and I think that's a wonderful message for any young person reading this book. Now, you have a really strong love of history, clearly. Where did that come from?
Well, that came from my parents. I really credit them. We used to read the newspaper after suppers. Newspapers were delivered at 4:30 in the afternoon when I grew up. And after supper, my parents would read the paper. And they would talk about all the world events, and then somehow some history would come out of, especially by my dad and my mom too. My mom read fiction And so she knew things through fiction. And that's where I picked up a love of fiction from. And she also read for an hour a day, so I used to copy that. And when I was little, I actually picked up, when I was in grade 2, I picked up A Tale of Two Cities. We didn't have that many books, but I thought I should copy what my mother did. I know.
I read it in grade 7. I thought I was pretty advanced.
Well, I got through it. I decided to, it took me, and I would come home every day and read for half an hour.
I was still reading Mr. Muggs.
I know. Well, we didn't have that many books in the house, so I picked one of the books. And I remember pieces of it, but like that was a model. It was a good model for me. And as was reading the newspaper after supper, because I decided I had to do that. And then over the years, I started to read harder and harder things. As I was less scared of the news items, I would read more and more news items. But that's where I got to learn about the world. And my parents, to their credit, never talked down to us. They didn't avoid telling us about what was going on in the world.
And one of your main characters, Jack, I thought that was really interesting, and that's how he got to learn about the world as well, because he read the newspapers. He read the newspapers, and he always made a point of bringing the paper home. Mm-hmm. So I did think that was really interesting. How you read the paper. You read the papers. You say as a family you read the paper. Did you read it out loud? Did the family read it out loud, or did you actually take that and were reading it yourself?
Well, everybody took a section, but then they would talk about an item, and so you'd hear about it, and then you might read it later or not. But it just sort of set the model that you were supposed to be interested in what was going on in the world, and you could talk about it.
So as a writer, you also wrote a column for years. You write your North End Nosh, which we're going to get into in a moment. You write book reviews, but you also write for children, maybe because you were in those schools for so long. What do you hope your readers will take away from your work?
Well, I will hope that they would take away that they have to be critical thinkers. They have to examine what is behind a claim. For instance, the claims that Bolsheviks were taking over Winnipeg, when there was never any claim by the strike committee, never. And history has borne that out if you want to investigate it. It was a fabricated claim that the City Committee of 1000 made. So to look behind what the rhetoric and to push away those ideas and look at the objective issue. What was going on? There was no insurrection. There was a demand. And to look, why would they be promoting racist ideas? Why were they trying to divide people? It was because they were trying to divide and conquer.
Yeah, and you really make sure that your children, your students, would think about this.
Yes.
This is how you were as a teacher too.
That's right.
I imagine, and it's certainly the message that comes through in the book with the characters. Very well done. You're watching Made in Manitoba Stories from Home with today's guest, Harriet Zaidman, author of City on Strike. I'm your host, Anita Daher. When we come back, Harriet's going to show us some of the dishes she features on her blog, North End Nosh. Welcome back to Made in Manitoba Stories from Home. I'm your host, Anita Daher. We've been speaking with author Harriet Zaidman about her novel,